In this lesson, we're going to be looking at how you analyse the 19th century prose fiction extracts in section A of paper 1. We're going to be looking at the particular language and structural features that you need to look out for, what's required by the question, and how you respond appropriately. So let's begin with the question. The question will always direct you to a short section of the text, which is usually between 10 and 15 lines, and we're talking here about question 3 in section A of paper 1. It's always going to ask you to analyse language and structure, so you're going to have to identify specific language and structural devices and name them using the correct term, but you'll be asked to analyse them in relation to a particular aspect of sight that is present within that short 10 to 15 line extract. Question 3 is worth 6 marks. Okay, you are dealing with a short section of the text, and you should aim for 3 really good PED paragraphs within the time available. Now, the rule is generally a mark a minute. However, because of the timings of paper 1, you can afford to spend a maximum, absolute maximum of 10 minutes providing your response to question 3. But your response to question 3 should fit within the space provided on the exam paper. If you are putting your hand up for extra paper, then you're not really answering the question effectively, and you need to think again about how you're providing that response. So do be careful when you're doing that. The expectation is that your response will fit within the space provided. In that response, you must include analytical comments on specific language features and specific structural features in order to get beyond sort of the halfway point in the mark scheme. To get more than 3 marks, you must provide comments on both. If you provide 3 absolutely brilliant, detailed, analytical comments on language, you still will not get beyond level 2 in the mark scheme, because the requirement is that you write about language and structure. And structure is more difficult. However, you don't have to have a balance of comments on language and structure, so that's worth bearing in mind. So what kinds of language and structure features could you look for in the 19th century prose fiction? Well, there could be lots of things there, and you need to, we can't tell you exactly what's going to come up, because it depends on which text you're looking at and which bit of the text you're looking at in response to question 3. But things that are likely to be there are things like figurative language, so metaphors, similes, personification, because obviously you're dealing with a literary text. Use of sensory descriptions, any kind of sensory language, and again that can be in the form of similes and metaphors. Could be the use of interesting adjectives and adverbs. You might see the use of juxtaposition, which is quite common in a lot of literary text, to create interesting images and convey interesting ideas. Groups of 3, these are a rhetorical device. They can work structurally as well, but quite often you'll see these 19th century writers putting groups of 3 similar types of descriptions together to really build up a picture of a character or of a setting, or to create atmosphere and mood, that kind of thing. Always look at word level, so look at any interesting use of adjectives, adverbs, verbs. Also look at the names of the characters and the places, because they may be significant as well. In terms of structural features, the sorts of things you're going to look at are primarily the sentence variation. So what sentence structures do you have? What sentence forms do you have? How much variation is there in there, and why are they varying that? What is that suggesting to you? Look for simple sentences, compound sentences and complex sentences, as well as the 4 different sentence forms. Look for the temporal markers or temporal shifts within the text. So look at the connectives, look at the topic sentences, and look at how the reader is guided through if you've got more than 1 paragraph. Look for repetition, and look at the narrative voice. Whose point of view are we seeing the events or whatever it might be from? Is it a character within the text? Is it an omniscient narrator? Who's actually telling the story? Who's narrating the story at that particular point? And then look for the linking of ideas. If you've got more than one paragraph in the section you're looking at, look at the way that the paragraphs link. If you haven't got more than one paragraph, if you've just got one bit of a longer paragraph, look at the way the ideas develop. Does it move through time? Does it move through place? Does the character come to some kind of understanding or realization over the course of the lines that you're looking at? So look at the development and the way that the narrative is moved forward by the writer. So in terms of knowing what to analyse, this comes really from understanding and being able to interpret the question. So on your screen you can see a very typical question 3. And the first thing to say is that you need to identify the line reference. You are only going to be asked to analyse a very short section of the 19th century extract. It will be between 10 and 15 lines. Make sure you know which bit you need to go to and look at in detail. You are never going to be asked to analyse the whole of that 19th century prose fiction extract, and your comments and your examples must come from within that line reference. The word how is there to tell you to analyse rather than simply identify. Remember, in the previous 2 questions you've been asked to identify words, phrases, examples of things and simply quote them. Now you're sort of stepping up your game and you're being asked to analyse, you're being asked to show understanding, not just the ability to locate and retrieve specific bits of information. This part of the question, which is there every single time, use language and structure, is there to remind you that you must comment on both language and structural devices. Your comments don't need to be equally balanced, so you can have 2 really good paragraphs on 2 separate language devices and 1 on a structural device, or vice versa, depending on the nature of the section of text you're looking at. And then you end up with a particular focus of sight that you're analysing the language in reference to. So in this case we're looking at an idea, so it will be an idea, a theme, or an event, or it could even be a setting. And in this case we're looking at how hard it is to do what is right. This question is only worth 6 marks. You should aim to write 3 really good detailed PED paragraphs within the time available, and make sure at least one of those PED paragraphs is on a specific aspect of structure. As I said previously, because of the timing of paper 1, that you can spend slightly longer than the mark a minute which applies on paper 2. You can afford to spend a maximum of 10 minutes answering this question, keeping your response within the space provided on the exam paper. Okay, let's go on now and have a look at an extract. So this is the extract referred to in the question we were just looking at. It's from Anna Karenina, and we're looking from She Was Horrified. So I'll just read it through and then we'll look at what's in there in terms of language and structure. She was horrified at her paleness as she glanced into the looking glass. At that moment she knew beyond doubt that he had come early on purpose to find her alone and to make her an offer. And only then, for the first time, the whole thing presented itself in a new, different aspect. Only then she realised that the question did not affect her only, with whom she would be happy and whom she loved, but that she would have that moment to wound a man whom she liked, and to wound him cruelly. What for? Because he, dear fellow, loved her, was in love with her, but there was no help for it. So it must be, so it would have to be. So this is the section of text we're looking at, and there are a number of things that jump out at you, or should jump out at you as you read this in terms of the language and structure. The first thing is this use of these temporal markers, at that moment, followed by that emphatic phrase, she knew beyond doubt. It indicates that sudden awful realisation that she's got to make this difficult decision. She knows she has to do it, that kind of gut-wrenching sense that you have, oh God, I've got to do this, I really don't want to do it. We then go on a little bit and we see the repeated use of words that express this idea of the sudden realisation, the sudden dawning of reality on her. The words moment, only, first time. So this decision that she's got to make fairly quickly is going to impact on the lives of her and other people for an entire lifetime. Then when we look at the punctuation, the semicolon and the hyphens are being used deliberately to control the pace. They're creating this halting, disjointed pace which reflects the difficulty she's having. She knows she's got to make this choice, and she's veering, she's flip-flopping between the two possibilities and trying to decide which is the right one to do. So that would be a relevant aspect of structure to comment on in relation to the question that's been asked. We then get this minor sentence, and to wound him cruelly, that is immediately followed by what for? The rhetorical question. There's a real sense of pleading in there, and now we're into her stream of consciousness. This is Kitty. We're seeing the workings of her mind. So the language, the punctuation, the sentence structures are all reflecting the turmoil that she's in as she's trying to make the right decision and trying to sort of please everybody and do the right thing. She's not taking the decision lightly. She's questioning herself. She doesn't come across as being a frivolous character. She's a very thoughtful character here. And then we get these kind of alterations in the tenses. So we get, because he, dear fellow, loved her, which obviously is past tense, and then we switch to the present tense, was in love with her, with the repetition of that word love. So we've got what was and what is, and then that continues at the end with these modal verbs. So it must be. So we're in the present now. We've stayed in the present. So it would be, and we move into the future tense. And by this point, the language here, these modal verbs are telling us that Kitty has made that decision. We've gone with her through her thought process as she comes to her final decision about what she's going to do. So you can see there's a good mixture there of language and structural features that we could write about in response to this. What I'm going to do now is to show you a worked example of a response using these annotations that would get the 6 marks that are on offer. So here is the response. I'll read it through and then I'll take you through it a bit at a time and explain why it would be a high scoring response. At the start of the passage, the writer uses the temporal marker at that moment, followed by the emphatic phrase "knew beyond doubt," to indicate Kitty's sudden awareness of having to make a very difficult decision. As the passage goes on, the repeated use of the words "only" and "moment" are used to reinforce the fact that Kitty has only just realised that she must make a difficult decision in a matter of moments which will impact on her life and that of others for a whole lifetime. In the middle of the passage, punctuation is used to recreate Kitty's troubled mental state, with the semicolon and hyphens creating a halting, disjointed pace, symbolic of the shifts in her mind as she tries to come to a decision which is fair to everyone concerned. There is a sense of closure towards the end of the passage, which starts with the minor sentence "and to wound him cruelly," which connotes an inevitability about this outcome now that Kitty has made her choice. The reader is left in no doubt that Kitty has indeed come to a decision at the end of the passage when the writer uses the 2 modal verbs must and would to indicate to the reader both the necessity of making the decision and the fact that Kitty has come to her final decision at this point in the text. Okay, so it's a very focused response. It is all the way through, it's answering the question that was asked. If we look, it's dealing with the whole of that short section, those sort of 12 lines, in a very logical way. So we start at the start of the passage, in the middle of the passage, towards the end of the passage, at the end of the passage. So we work our way through. So we're really pulling this text apart, this passage of text apart in lots of detail. The other thing to note is that there is the use of the correct technical terms to refer to the devices, and relevant quotations are provided to illustrate those. In addition, all the way through, everything that's underlined in red are examples of analytical language. They're showing an understanding of the effect. So it's being used to indicate, to show, to recreate. It's creating, it's symbolic of, there is a sense of, which connotes, the reader is left in no doubt. It is used to indicate to the reader. So the use of analytical language as opposed to evaluative language or any other kind of language is good throughout this response. There's a good mixture of comments on specific language and structural features. So the things highlighted in blue on your screen are specific language features, and then the things highlighted in yellow are structural features. And what you'll notice is in the stronger responses, people will often write about a feature that works both linguistically and structurally, because there are lots of features, things like three-part lists, repetition, semantic fields. They work structurally as well as linguistically, so you can write about both features at once. And overall, what we would say about this response is that it shows a perceptive, detailed and sustained understanding of how the writer is using very specific language and structural devices to convey the element of sight that is specified in the question. So this response is focused, it's logical, it's analytical, and it gets full marks because it remains analytical all the way through, and there is a good mixture of language and structural devices.